Sandra's unexpected gift, it was a quiet evening. The kind of evening where the world outside seemed too still, and the weight of silence pressed on the walls of Keanu Reeves's home. He sat at a wooden table near the window, the soft light of dusk touching his face. There were no cameras, no crowds, no flashing lights. Only him, a man who carried both the glory of success and the shadows of loneliness. The knock at the door startled him. It was soft, almost uncertain, but enough to break through the stillness. Keanu rose slowly, unsure who it could be. When he opened the door, he saw Sandra Bullock standing there with a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes carried something deeper, something unsaid. "I know it's not your birthday," she said with a small laugh, "but I wanted to give you this." Keanu looked at her, surprised. Over the years, he had received countless gifts from people. Lavish, expensive, meant to impress. But something about this moment felt different. It wasn't just the gift in her hands. It was the way she held it, as if it carried a piece of her heart. He invited her in, and they sat together at the table. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy, though. It was the kind of silence two people share when they know words aren't enough. Finally, Keanu carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved, simple but beautiful. He opened it slowly, and his breath caught when he saw what was inside. There were letters, folded, aged slightly at the edges, written in Sandra's handwriting. "These aren't just letters," she explained softly. "They're moments, memories I wrote down over the years, moments where I saw you show kindness, humility, or strength when no one else was watching. I thought you should know how much those moments mattered." Keanu's eyes filled with emotion. For so long, he had lived in the quiet shadows of grief and resilience, never asking for recognition. To him, kindness was simply how life should be lived. But here was Sandra, reminding him that even the smallest acts he thought went unnoticed had left a mark on someone he deeply respected. The first letter he pulled out was about a time during filming when he stayed late to help a crew member fix a broken prop. No cameras, no press, just a quiet act of care. Another letter spoke of how he once paused during a busy red carpet event to comfort a young fan who had been pushed aside. Sandra had noticed it all, carried it with her, and now returned it to him in the form of words. The room felt heavy with unspoken emotion. Keanu blinked back tears, and Sandra reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "Sometimes," she whispered, "we forget our own worth. I wanted you to see yours the way others see it." He could not find words. The letters lay open on the table, glowing softly in the fading daylight, each one a reflection of his quiet humanity. But just as Keanu began to feel the warmth of her gift, something stirred inside him. An unease, a question. Why now? Why had she chosen this moment to share something so personal, so vulnerable? And was this gift only about gratitude, or was there something deeper hidden between her words? The suspense hung in the air, as if the letters themselves carried a secret waiting to be revealed. The letters that whispered truth. The night stretched on, but the wooden box and its folded letters seemed to fill the room with their own quiet energy. Keanu sat still, his hand resting on the box as if letting go might somehow shatter the fragile weight of the moment. Sandra sat across from him, her face calm, but her eyes, those eyes carried something more. The first hook of tension came when Keanu asked softly, "Why now, Sandra? After all these years, why give me this gift today?" Her smile faltered for just a second, and that hesitation told him there was more behind her gesture than simple kindness. She leaned back in her chair, looking at him carefully. "Because, Keanu," she whispered, "sometimes life gives us reminders when we need them most. I thought you needed one now." But Keanu wasn't convinced. He turned his gaze back to the letters, pulling out another. This one was different from the first. It was longer, more personal, and as he read it, the world seemed to quiet around him. In it, Sandra had written about a moment during a film shoot where Keanu had insisted on eating with the crew instead of the stars, sitting on the ground with them, laughing, listening. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but Sandra's words painted it as something extraordinary. She described how the crew had felt respected, how they carried that memory, with pride long after the shoot was over. As he read, his throat tightened. He had never seen himself the way she saw him. To him, kindness was ordinary. To her, it was something rare, something worth remembering. But then he noticed something else. At the bottom of the letter, beneath her words, there was a small line, written almost as if she hadn't meant for him to see it. It read, "Sometimes I wonder if he knows how much these small things have saved me too." Saved her? Keanu paused. His mind turned over those words again and again. The letters weren't only about him. They were about her too. They were a mirror of her own quiet struggles, hidden within her gratitude. Hook number 2 came when Sandra suddenly stood up and walked toward the window. Her back was to him as she spoke. "Keanu, these letters, they're not just about the past. They're also about what I couldn't say out loud. The truth is, you've been carrying people all your life, lifting them with your kindness. But what you don't know is that sometimes you were carrying me." Keanu felt his chest tighten. This wasn't the light, simple gesture of friendship he thought it was. This was heavier, deeper. He rose slowly and walked to her side. Outside the window, the city lights flickered like distant stars, but inside, the air was filled with something unspoken. "Sandra," he said softly, "what are you trying to tell me?" She turned then, and for the first time that night, her strong composure slipped. Her voice trembled. "You think you've only been surviving your own battles, but Keanu, you saved me from mine. I didn't write those letters to remind you of who you are. I wrote them because they reminded me of who I could be." The words struck him like thunder. He had never thought of himself as someone who could save anyone. Yet here she was, standing before him, confessing that his quiet choices, his humble ways, had helped her through storms she never spoke about. Hook number 3 rose when Sandra reached for his hand and placed one last folded note into his palm. "This one," she whispered. "I never thought I'd give you, but tonight feels like the moment." Keanu looked down at the paper. It was smaller than the others, more fragile, as if it had been written in haste or desperation. His heart pounded as he unfolded it, and as his eyes fell on the words, he felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't just a memory, it was a confession. A moment where she had stood on the edge of giving up, lost in the loneliness of fame and life, and how something simple he had done, a phone call, a few quiet words of encouragement, had pulled her back. The realization tore through him. His kindness had been her anchor, and yet she had carried this truth silently, only now choosing to place it in his hands. But why now? What had changed? Keanu looked at her, and the question burned inside him. Was this gift just about gratitude? Or was there something deeper, something she needed from him in this very moment? The suspense thickened, and the silence between them felt like the moment before a storm breaks. The letter that changed everything. The small note trembled in Keanu's hand as if it carried more weight than he could bear. The room felt charged, like a storm hovering above them, waiting for lightning to strike. He looked at Sandra, her face calm but her eyes wet, as if she already knew the questions forming inside him. "Sandra?" His voice was quiet, almost breaking. "Why would you keep this from me for so long?" Her answer came slowly, her words like threads unraveling one by one. "Because I was afraid, Keanu. afraid that if I told you how much you meant to me in those moments, you'd see me differently. And I wasn't ready for that. The hook tightened. Right there. The idea that behind every letter was not just gratitude, but fear. Fear of being too vulnerable. Fear of losing what they had. Keanu sat back down at the table, the note still open in his hand. The words on it replayed in his mind. That night I was close to breaking, but your call reminded me I was not invisible. You saved me without even knowing. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the weight of her pain and the realization that what he thought were small gestures had been lifelines for her. You've always been the strong one, Sandra, he said. I never imagined you carried this kind of struggle. She gave him a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. That's because people like us, we're good at hiding. We show the world our best selves and we bury the rest. But when you showed kindness, Keanu, you reminded me I didn't have to pretend all the time. Hook number 2 arrived as she reached into her bag and pulled out something else. Not another letter, but a photograph. She slid it across the table, to him. Do you remember this? Keanu picked it up, his brow furrowing. It was a picture of them taken years ago during the filming of a movie. In the photo, he was laughing, genuinely laughing, while she leaned against him, her face full of light. I kept this, she whispered, because that was the first day I realized you weren't just kind. You were safe. And for someone like me, safety is the rarest gift. The hook here wasn't just nostalgia. It was revelation. Sandra wasn't just thankful. She was confessing that her bond with him was rooted in something much deeper. Keanu felt torn. The silence of the room pressed harder now. He wanted to speak, to tell her that he never saw himself as anyone's savior. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he asked, Why now, Sandra? What's really happening? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Because time isn't promised, Keanu. And sometimes the things we bury too long, they rot inside us. The hook pulled tighter. Time. Urgency. A reason she chose this night. This moment. Keanu's heart began to race. He leaned forward. Are you saying something's wrong? Sandra's eyes glistened as she held his gaze. I don't want you to worry, she began softly. But I've been facing things I didn't want to share. These letters, they were my way of saying, if I never found the courage to tell you everything, at least you'd know this truth, that you mattered, that you changed me. Keanu froze. His mind tried to piece together her words. Was she ill? Was there something she wasn't telling him? Fully? The third and strongest hook came when Keanu, without thinking, reached across the table and took both her hands in his. Sandra, whatever it is, don't carry it alone. You've carried too much in silence already. Let me be here now. Her tears slipped free, falling onto the table. She squeezed his hands back. You've always been here, Keanu, even when you didn't know it. But tonight, I need you to listen to the rest. Because the letters are only the beginning. There's one more truth you haven't seen yet. His breath caught. The box of letters sat between them like a locked door, and he realized she held the key to something far bigger than he imagined. The night had begun with a gift, but now it felt like a confession that could change not just his view of her, but his view of himself. The truth behind the silence. The box of letters still rested between them, but Keanu felt as if the weight of it had already shifted to his chest. Every word Sandra had spoken pressed deeper into him, forcing him to face truths he wasn't prepared for. The room was quiet, yet it wasn't empty. It was filled with questions, with memories, with the invisible presence of something Sandra still hadn't said. He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. Sandra, if there's more I need to know, don't protect me from it. I can carry it. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a slow breath, as if gathering courage. When she opened them again, they shimmered with both fear and relief. Keanu, do you remember the night we wrapped that movie? Everyone celebrated, the lights, the laughter, the champagne, but I disappeared early. He frowned, searching his memory. Yes, he remembered. She had left quietly, without explanation. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Actors often needed their space. That night, she whispered, I wasn't going home. I was driving with no direction, lost in myself. I was ready to end everything. I didn't see a reason to stay anymore. The words cut through him like a blade. Keanu's heart pounded. The hook tightened. This wasn't just about gratitude or even hidden struggles. This was about survival. Hers. She continued, her voice trembling. And then my phone rang. It was you. You didn't even know what I was thinking. You just said you wanted to check in, to thank me for the work we did together. It was such a simple call, Keanu, but it stopped me. It made me pull over. It reminded me I still mattered to someone. Keanu felt his throat close. He remembered that call. To him, it was nothing. Extraordinary, just a small moment of kindness and instinct. But now, knowing what it had meant to her, he realized it had been life-saving. Hook number 2 came as she looked directly into his eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you see now, Keanu? These letters aren't about memories. They're proof. Proof that your kindness is not small. Proof that it has saved lives even when you never meant to. You think you're just surviving in silence, but you've been a light for people without even knowing. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Keanu lowered his gaze, overwhelmed. He had spent years thinking his existence was quiet, unnoticed, a shadow in Hollywood's bright world. Yet here was Sandra telling him that his quietness had been her lifeline. He whispered, I never knew, Sandra. I never thought my presence could mean so much. She reached across the table, placing her hand gently on his. That's because humility blinds you to your own worth. You've been carrying so much grief, so much loneliness, that you never stopped to see what you were giving away. But Keanu, it's time you know. You are not invisible. You never were. The hook tightened again when Sandra suddenly pushed the box of letters closer to him. And there's one more thing. One letter you haven't read yet. The one I never planned to give you. Keanu looked at her, his heart racing. Why didn't you plan to give it? She hesitated. Her lips trembled. Because it's not just gratitude. It's the truth I've hidden the longest. The truth about how I really feel about you. The silence that followed was unbearable. Keanu's mind raced. What could she mean? Admiration? Love? Something deeper? Hook number 3 struck as she stood and walked slowly to the window, her, back to him. If you read that last letter, Keanu, things may never be the same between us. But if I keep it hidden, I'll live with the weight of regret. His hands trembled as he picked up the final folded paper. It was smaller than the rest, written in handwriting that looked rushed, almost desperate. The edges were frayed as if it had been opened and folded again and again over the years. He looked at Sandra, who stood still, her silhouette framed by the city lights outside. Do you want me to read this now? He asked softly. Her answer came without turning around. Yes, because tonight, I can't keep hiding. Keanu unfolded the paper, his heart pounding. The room seemed to hold its breath, and as his eyes began to move across the words, he felt the ground shift beneath him. The last letter, Keanu's fingers shook as he held the final letter. The paper felt fragile, as if it carried the weight of years, a secret pressing to be free. The silence in the room was unbearable, louder than any words. Sandra still stood, by the window, her back to him, as if she couldn't face what was about to be revealed. He unfolded the letter carefully, his eyes scanning the first lines. His breath caught instantly. Keanu, I've written these words 100 times and torn them up each time. I told myself I should never give them to you because once you know, there's no turning back. But every time I see you, your kindness, your strength, your humility, I feel the truth grow heavier inside me. The truth is, I have loved you for years. Not as a co-star, not as a friend, but as the person who makes me believe in goodness again. I never said it, because I was afraid you would walk away and I'd lose the only safe place I had. Keanu's hands froze, his chest tightening as if the air had been pulled from the room. He looked up, but Sandra still hadn't turned around. His heart hammered. She wasn't just thanking him. She wasn't just confessing her struggles. She was laying bare the deepest truth of her heart. The first hook hit here. The quiet, unexpected revelation that Sandra Bullock, someone the world saw as strong, fearless, untouchable, had been silently in love with him all this time. Keanu whispered, almost to himself. Sandra, you've loved me? She finally turned, her face wet with tears, her voice trembling. Yes. And I was terrified to say it, because you've lost so much in your life, Keanu. I didn't want to add more weight to your shoulders. I didn't want to risk breaking what we already had. But when I watched you tonight, holding those letters, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Keanu lowered the letter onto the table. His heart was a storm. Grief, gratitude, confusion, and something else he wasn't ready to name. For years, he had lived in shadows, carrying the weight of loss, surviving with humility. Now here was Sandra, telling him he wasn't just a friend or a co-star. He was her anchor, her light, the love she had hidden. The second hook came when Sandra took a step closer and said softly, You always think of yourself as a man who stands in the background, unnoticed. But Keanu, I saw you. I always saw you. And somewhere along the way, my respect turned into something more. His eyes burned with tears he didn't want to release. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Sandra, why didn't you tell me sooner? She gave a fragile smile. Because I was afraid the timing would never be right. And maybe it still isn't. But tonight, I realized something worse than rejection. The regret of never letting you know. Keanu leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the storm inside him. Her words were heavy, but they weren't a burden. They were a gift, as raw and powerful as the letters themselves. Yet the third and strongest hook came when Sandra suddenly whispered, Keanu, I need to ask you something. If this is the last time I ever tell you how I feel, if life takes me away tomorrow, would you at least remember me for this truth? Not the actress, not the friend, but the woman who loved you quietly, fiercely, and forever? The question tore through him. She wasn't asking for love in return. She wasn't demanding an answer. She was asking only to be remembered, to know that her truth wouldn't vanish into silence. Keanu rose slowly from his chair, the letter still on the table between them. He walked toward her, his steps unsteady, his heart louder than his thoughts. When he reached her, he placed his hand gently against her cheek. Sandra, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I could never forget this. I could never forget you. For the first time, she let out a sob she had been holding back for years. She leaned into his touch, and in that moment, the world outside disappeared. But Keanu's mind was still a battlefield. The confession had broken open wounds he thought were closed. Love was something he had feared, something he had pushed away to survive. And now, standing here with Sandra, he was faced with a choice. Stay in the safety of silence, or step into the unknown of love. The night was no longer just about a gift or letters. It had become about truth, about whether two souls scarred by life could find healing in each other. The choice of the heart. The night had grown darker, but inside the room the air was brighter with unspoken truth. The box of letters sat quietly on the table, but its presence had changed everything. Sandra's confession still echoed in Keanu's mind. "I have loved you for years." He stood before her, his hand still resting on her cheek, his eyes searching hers for answers he didn't know how to ask. For a long time, neither of them moved. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath for what would come next. The first hook came here, in the silence. Silence is not empty. It is full of decisions, full of fear, full of the possibility of breaking or healing. Finally, Keanu spoke. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Sandra, I don't know if I know how to love anymore. I've lost so much. I've lived in shadows for so long. But hearing your words, it feels like someone has lit a fire inside me I thought was gone." Her eyes filled with tears again. But this time they weren't only tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of finally being seen. "I didn't tell you to get something back, Keanu. I told you because I couldn't keep it hidden anymore. I needed you to know you're more than you think you are. And if love is too heavy for you right now, I can still live with that. What I can't live with is silence." Keanu's heart pounded. He thought of all the years he had carried pain quietly, never asking for comfort, never letting anyone close enough to see the cracks. But Sandra had always been there, quiet, steady, watching him with eyes that never judged. The second hook appeared as he remembered the small moments they had shared. Laughing between takes, comforting each other through exhaustion, the countless quiet ways they had been more than colleagues. They had been each other's safe place without even realizing it. He whispered, "Sandra, maybe I've been afraid of love not because it's heavy, but because it's real. And real things can break. But maybe real things can heal, too." Her breath caught. She didn't move, afraid the moment would shatter if she did. Then Keanu did something unexpected. He picked up the final letter from the table, folded it carefully and placed it back into the wooden box. He closed the lid and looked into her eyes. "This box isn't just filled with your words, Sandra. It's filled with reminders of who we are when the world isn't watching. And if your heart has carried this truth for so long, then I won't let mine stay silent anymore." The third and strongest hook came when Keanu finally spoke the words he had been holding back for years. "I don't just remember you as a friend, Sandra. I've loved you too, quietly in my own way. I was just too afraid to name it." The tears that spilled down her face now were not of sorrow, but of joy, of relief, of a weight finally lifted. She stepped closer, and for the first time, there was no wall of fear, no silence, no hiding. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her as if letting go would mean losing the only truth that mattered. The room was filled with a quiet stillness, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was warm. It was safe. Keanu whispered against her hair. "Maybe love isn't about grand gestures. Maybe it's about these quiet truths that save us when we don't even know we need saving." Sandra nodded through her tears. "And maybe it's about finally giving ourselves permission to feel it." They stood there, two souls who had carried so much pain, finally finding healing not in the noise of the world, but in the quiet truth of each other. The night ended not with fireworks, not with drama, but with something far greater: understanding. The gift Sandra had given wasn't just a box of letters. It was a mirror, showing Keanu the man he had always been, and revealing the love that had been silently waiting between them. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope.